The rain had been falling steadily since morning, the kind of gray, misty drizzle that made Chicago feel like it was wrapped in a damp wool blanket. Inside the daily grind, a small corner cafe tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat, the air smelled of roasted beans, warm cinnamon, and wet wool from customers shaking off their coats. Steam curled from mugs and soft jazz played just loud enough to fill the silence without drowning out conversation. Behind the counter, a young woman wiped down the espresso machine with practiced ease. She'd been working here for 3 years, long enough to know every regular by their usual order, but not long enough to stop dreaming of something beyond the clatter of cups and the hum of the grinder. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment with a roommate who'd just moved out, leaving her scrambling to cover rent on her own. Student loans from community college still hung over her like storm clouds, and her part-time gig designing flyers for local businesses barely made a dent. But she didn't complain. Life wasn't easy, but it was hers, and she was used to making do. That afternoon, the cafe was quieter than usual. Most people had stayed in, deterred by the weather. She was restocking oat milk when the bell above the door chimed. A man walked in, tall and lean, wearing a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was slightly damp, his shoes polished but scuffed at the heel like he'd walked farther than he usually did. He didn't look around nervously or fumble with his phone like most first-timers. He just stood there for a moment, taking in the room, as if giving himself permission to pause. She greeted him with a warm but professional smile. "Hi there. What can I get for you?" "Black coffee." "Artem," he said, his voice low and calm, with just a hint of tiredness underneath. "Coming right up," she said, already turning to the machine. He found a table by the window, the one farthest from the door, and sat with his back straight, hands resting on the table like he wasn't quite sure what to do with them. She noticed he didn't pull out his phone or a laptop. He just watched the rain slide down the glass, his expression unreadable but not unfriendly, more like someone who'd forgotten how to relax. She brought his coffee over, setting it down gently. "Here you go." "Anything else?" He looked up, surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to come to the table. "No, thank you. This is perfect." She nodded and turned to clear a nearby table where a couple had just left. As she gathered the empty cups, her elbow bumped the edge of a tray she'd set down too close to the aisle. A splash of leftover oat milk arced through the air and landed right on the sleeve of his coat. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," she gasped, grabbing a napkin before the stain could spread. "I didn't even see it there." "Let me—" He held up a hand, not angry, just startled. "It's okay, really." But she was already dabbing at the spot, cheeks burning. "I'll get you a fresh one. Or actually, I can run to the back and grab a clean cloth. This stuff dries sticky." He watched her for a second, then said quietly, "You don't have to." She paused, napkin in hand. "I spilled on your coat." "Of course I do." He gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "It's just a coat." There was something in the way he said it, not dismissive but weary, like he'd long stopped caring about things that used to matter. That quiet sadness made her hesitate. She'd seen that look before, on her brother's face after their dad lost his job, on her own reflection during the worst stretch of last winter. She stepped back, folding the napkin. "Still, sorry again." He nodded, then took a slow sip of his coffee. She returned to the counter but kept glancing his way. He didn't leave, didn't check his watch, just sat there sipping, staring out at the street like he was waiting for something or someone who never showed. An hour passed. The rain let up a little. A few more customers trickled in. She refilled sugar jars, wiped counters, rang up pastries. And still he stayed. When she finally approached to ask if he needed a refill, he looked up like he'd forgotten where he was. "Actually," he said, setting his empty cup down, "I have a strange question." She raised an eyebrow, half expecting him to ask if they served gluten-free scones or if the Wi-Fi password had changed. He reached into his coat pocket, not for his phone, but for a slim leather wallet. He pulled out a crisp bill and placed it on the table between them. "Here's $500, he said, voice steady but eyes searching hers. "Will you fake to be my date for a day?" She blinked, once, twice, then laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Excuse me?" He didn't smile, didn't look away. "It's not what it sounds like, no tricks. No expectations, just pretend to be my girlfriend for one evening. A family dinner." My grandmother's turning 90.
She thinks I'm lonely.
She's not wrong. She stared at the money. $500. That was half her rent. 2 weeks' groceries. A dent in her loan balance. Her mind raced, but her gut tightened. Why me? She asked, arms crossed now. Not out of defensiveness, but to keep herself grounded. He glanced around the cafe, then back at her. Because you're kind. You apologized for a drop of milk like it was your fault the sky rained. And you didn't treat me like I'm someone important just because I'm wearing a nice coat. She didn't know what to say to that. I'm not asking for anything real, he added quickly. Just show up, smile, answer a few questions. Let my grandmother believe for one night that I'm not alone. She looked down at the bill. It felt heavy even though it wasn't touching her. She thought about her brother, who'd just started night classes and needed new textbooks. She thought about the leak in the bathroom ceiling she kept meaning to call about. She thought about how tired she was of choosing between eating well and paying bills. But she also thought about trust. About boundaries. About walking into a stranger's life with no idea what waited on the other side. Who are you? She asked finally. Just a guy who's good at running a company but bad at being human, he said. And for the first time there was a flicker of humor in his voice. My name's Oliver. I run a tech firm downtown. We build software for hospitals. Nothing flashy. Nothing dangerous. She studied him. No wedding ring. No nervous tics. No arrogance in his posture, just a quiet exhaustion that felt honest. And after the dinner? She asked. We go our separate ways? Yes, he said. Unless you'd like to keep in touch. But no pressure. The 500 is yours either way. She exhaled slowly. The cafe was quiet again. The jazz song had ended and only the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. This feels weird, she admitted. It is, he agreed. But sometimes weird is better than lonely. She thought about that. About how many times she'd said yes to things just to avoid being alone. Bad relationships, late night shifts, favors for friends who never returned them. But this wasn't about her loneliness. It was about his. And maybe, in a strange way, about both of them. Okay, she said, surprising herself. But I have conditions. He leaned forward slightly. Name them. 1, I pick my own outfit. No designer dresses or anything I can't afford to replace. Fair. 2, you tell me everything I need to know beforehand. Names, inside jokes, family drama. I'm not walking in blind. Absolutely. 3, she said, holding his gaze. You don't treat me like hired help. If we're pretending to be a couple, we're equals. Even if it's fake, a slow nod. Understood. She looked at the money again, then pushed it gently back toward him. Keep it for now. If I show up and everything checks out, you can give it to me after. He blinked, then smiled, really smiled this time. It changed his whole face. Made him look younger, lighter. Deal, he said. She extended her hand. He shook it. His grip was firm but not overpowering. Warm despite the rain outside. I'm usually off at 6, she said. We can talk more then if you're still here. I'll be here, he said. And just like that, the strangest offer of her life hung in the air between them. Not as a transaction, but as a possibility. She walked back to the counter, heart still pounding but not from fear. From something else. Something like curiosity. Outside, the rain had stopped. A sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off wet pavement. Inside, the coffee machine hissed, the jazz started again, and 2 strangers sat a few feet apart, each wondering if this odd little moment might lead somewhere neither of them expected. The next 2 days passed in a blur of steam wands, sugar spills, and the quiet hum of the cafe's espresso machine. She kept replaying the conversation in her head. His tired eyes, the $500, the way he'd said lonely, like it was a secret he'd carried too long. Part of her expected him not to show up again. Rich people change their minds all the time, didn't they? But just after closing on the second evening, there he was, standing outside the cafe in a simple sweater and dark jeans, no overcoat this time, holding 2 paper cups. Brought you a tea, he said when she stepped out, locking the door behind her. Chamomile. I remembered you mentioned it once when you were talking to another barista. She was surprised he'd been paying that much attention. Thanks, she said, taking the cup. The warmth seeped into her fingers. So, we're really doing this? We are, he said. If you're still in, she nodded. I am, but I need to know everything. Like everything? He smiled faintly. Fair enough. They walked to a nearby park, the kind with old oak trees and benches worn smooth by years of use. The city noise faded into the background. Car horns, distant sirens, the chatter of people heading home. They sat side by side, not too close, not too far. Her name is Eleanor, he began. My grandmother. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. She's sharp as a tack, loves crossword puzzles, hates people who chew with their mouths open, and believes every problem can be solved with a good pot of soup. She listened, sipping her tea. She's been asking about my love life for years, not in a pushy way, more like gentle nudges. Have you met anyone nice? You work too much, dear. That kind of thing. Lately she's been quieter. I think she's worried I'll end up like my dad, married to his job, gone before he got to really live. He paused, staring at the ground. I didn't realize I was doing the same thing until she said, I just want to see you happy before I go. Her chest tightened. She's not sick, is she? No, healthy as a horse, according to her doctor. But she's 90. She knows time's running out, and I haven't given her much to hold on to. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then softly, so you want her to think you found someone. Not just someone, he said. Someone real, kind, grounded, that's why I asked you. She looked away, flattered but cautious. I'm just a barista. You're more than that, he said simply, and I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be you. She'll see it. They spent the next hour going over details. His grandmother lived in a quiet neighborhood on the north side. The dinner would be at her favorite Italian place. Family-owned. Red checkered tablecloths. Garlic bread that could bring the dead back to life, according to Eleanor. There'd be a few cousins, an aunt, maybe a family friend or two. No one important. Just people who loved her. What should I call you? She asked. Oliver is fine. Everyone calls me that. And what do I say we do together? We met at a bookstore, he said without missing a beat. You were looking for a poetry collection. I recommended Mary Oliver. You laughed and said, no relation, I hope? She chuckled. That's actually pretty good. It's true, he said. I did that once. With a stranger. It didn't go anywhere, but the line stuck. They practiced small things. How to hold a wine glass, not by the bowl. It warms the wine too fast, he explained. How to greet Eleanor, she'll hug you. Don't pull away. What to say if someone asks how long they've been dating. A few months. It's still new. At first it felt stiff, like rehearsing for a play. But then he asked her about her life, really asked. Not just surface stuff, but the kind of questions that made her think. What did she want to do beyond the cafe? Did she ever get scared of failing? What made her feel most alive? She told him about her design work, how she'd taught herself Photoshop watching YouTube tutorials, how she dreamed of opening a small studio someday, maybe teaching kids in her old neighborhood. He listened like every word mattered, not like he was checking a box, but like he genuinely wanted to know who she was. In return, he told her about the weight of running a company where people's jobs, and sometimes lives, depended on his decisions. About the loneliness of success when no one knows the real you. About how he'd stopped dating because every relationship felt like another performance. You're not performing now? She asked gently. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't think I am. The next evening they met again, this time at a quiet cafe downtown, far from her usual spot. He'd brought a notebook with bullet points, but they barely used it. Instead, they talked. Really talked. He admitted he'd never brought anyone to meet Eleanor before. Not even real dates, he said. It felt too final. Like if I introduced them, I'd have to mean it. She understood that. She'd done the same. Kept people at arm's length because letting them in meant risking disappointment. By the third rehearsal, the lines between fake and real started to blur. He'd remembered she liked her coffee with 1 sugar, no cream. She'd noticed he always stirred his tea 3 times, never 4. Small things. Human things. The night before the dinner, they met one last time. He brought her a simple black dress, nothing flashy, just elegant and comfortable. I asked my assistant to pick it, he said quickly. She's about your size. You can keep it or return it. No pressure. She ran her fingers over the fabric. It was soft. Thank you. They sat on a bench outside her apartment building. The air was cool, the streetlights casting long shadows. What if I mess up? She asked quietly. You won't, he said. But even if you do, she'll forgive you. She forgives everyone. That's her superpower. She looked at him. Why did you really ask me? Out of all the people in that cafe? He was quiet for a while. Then, because you looked at me like I was just a person. Not a CEO, not a paycheck, just someone who spilled coffee on his sleeve and didn't care. I haven't felt that in a long time. Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. They walked her to her door. He didn't try to hug her or touch her hand. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, like he was giving her space to decide how this night ended. Thank you, she said, for trusting me with this. I should be thanking you, he said. For saying yes, she smiled. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow, he echoed. Back inside, she hung the dress carefully in her closet. She thought about her brother asleep in the next room, dreaming of becoming a teacher. She thought about her mom, who always said, kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything. And she thought about Oliver, how he carried his loneliness like a heavy coat, but still showed up, still tried. The next morning, she ironed the dress, polished her one pair of decent heels, practiced her smile in the mirror, not the fake one she used for rude customers, but the real one, the one that reached her eyes. She wasn't doing this for the money anymore. Not really. She was doing it because someone had asked for help in the quietest, most honest way possible. And maybe, just maybe, in helping him, she'd remember how to be kind to herself too. When the car pulled up that evening, a sleek black sedan, driver in uniform, she took a deep breath, grabbed her small clutch and stepped outside. Oliver was waiting by the curb. He wore a navy suit, no tie, hair slightly messy like he'd run his hands through it too many times. You look, he started, then stopped, searching for the right word. Like I belong, she offered. He smiled. Exactly like that. They got in the car. The city lights blurred past the windows. Neither spoke much, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was calm, like two people who'd already said the important things. And as they drove toward the restaurant, toward Eleanor, toward a night built on a lie that somehow felt truer than most truths, she realized something. She wasn't pretending anymore. She was just being there. For him, for herself, for the chance that kindness, real, simple kindness, might be enough. The restaurant smelled like garlic, rosemary, and decades of family meals. Red checkered tablecloths, flickering candles in Chianti bottles, and the low murmur of Italian voices from the kitchen made it feel less like a place to eat and more like stepping into someone's warm, noisy home. She smoothed her dress for the 10th time and took a slow breath. Oliver stood beside her, straightening his cuffs, his jaw tight. You okay? She whispered. He nodded, but his eyes darted toward the back corner of the room. She's already here. At a large round table near the window sat an elegant woman with silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, wearing a deep green dress and pearl earrings that caught the candlelight. She was laughing at something a younger woman, probably a cousin, had just said, her hands gesturing with the energy of someone half her age. There was a lightness about her, a kind of grace that didn't come from money or status, but from having lived fully, loved deeply, and survived loss without letting it harden her heart. That's Eleanor, Oliver said softly. She's beautiful, she replied, meaning it. They walked over together. As soon as Eleanor saw them, her eyes lit up. She stood, slowly, but with dignity, and opened her arms. Oliver, and you must be... Her voice trailed off, warm and curious. This is my girlfriend, Oliver said, his voice steady but his hand brushing lightly against the small of her back, a gesture that felt protective, not rehearsed. Hi, she said quickly, stepping forward and offering her hand. I'm so happy to meet you. Eleanor didn't take her hand. Instead, she pulled her into a hug, soft, firm, and full of the kind of affection usually reserved for people you've known your whole life. She smelled like lavender and vanilla. Oh, sweetheart, Eleanor said, pulling back just enough to look her in the eyes. You're even lovelier than he described. She felt her cheeks warm. He said nice things? He said you made him laugh for the first time in months, Eleanor said, squeezing her hand before turning to Oliver. And that you didn't care how much his shoes cost. Oliver looked startled, then embarrassed. I may have mentioned that. The table erupted in gentle laughter. Everyone made room for them. She sat between Oliver and a cheerful woman in her 50s who introduced herself as his aunt. The dinner began with antipasto platters, crusty bread, and endless pours of red wine. At first, she stuck to the script, answered questions about how they met, how long they'd been together, what she did for work. But Eleanor wasn't interested in rehearsed answers. "So," she said, leaning forward with a twinkle in her eye, "do you believe in love at first sight?" She almost choked on her bread. Oliver shot her a panicked look, but she recovered quickly. "I believe in connection at first sight," she said carefully. "The kind where you feel like you've known someone forever, even if you just met." Eleanor nodded slowly, as if she'd been waiting to hear that exact thing. "That's the real kind. The rest is just timing." The conversation flowed from there, not about jobs or money or status, but about books, childhood memories, the best way to make tomato sauce. Eleanor insisted on simmering it for 6 hours, and whether dogs or cats made better companions. "Dogs," she said without hesitation. "They love you even when you're having a bad day." At one point, Oliver excused himself to take a work call, something urgent from the office. As soon as he was out of earshot, Eleanor turned to her. "You're not really his girlfriend, are you?" Her heart dropped. She opened her mouth to deny it, to smooth it over, but something in Eleanor's gaze stopped her. There was no anger, no judgment, just quiet understanding. I was hired to be here," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Just for tonight. He didn't want you to worry." Eleanor studied her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, she smiled. "I know. You know? My dear, I've been married, widowed, raised a grandson who runs a company most people have never heard of. But that saves lives every day. And I've seen every kind of loneliness there is. Oliver thinks he's fooling me, but he's been lonely since he was 12 years old. He just got better at hiding it." She didn't know what to say. "I didn't mean to lie to you." "You didn't," Eleanor said gently. "You showed up. You listened. You treated him like a person, not a title. That's more real than most relationships I've seen." She felt tears prick her eyes. "He's a good man." "He is," Eleanor agreed. "But good men forget they deserve joy too." When Oliver returned looking slightly frazzled, Eleanor patted his hand. "Your young lady was just telling me about her dream to open a design studio. Isn't that wonderful?" He looked at her, confused but relieved. "Yeah, it is." The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of laughter, shared stories, and plates of homemade ravioli that tasted like comfort. She found herself relaxing, forgetting the script, just being herself. She told them about teaching her little brother how to draw when he was scared of the dark, about how she once stayed up all night redesigning a flyer for a local animal shelter for free, because their old one made the dogs look sad. Oliver listened, like every word was a gift. At one point he reached for her hand under the table, not as part of the act but because he wanted to. And she let him. By the time dessert arrived, tiramisu, so light it melted on the tongue, she realized something. She hadn't thought about the $500 once all evening. After cake and candles and a slightly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday, the family began to say their goodbyes. Hugs were exchanged, promises to visit soon were made, and Eleanor pulled her aside one last time. "Thank you," the older woman whispered, pressing a small envelope into her hand. "Not for pretending. For seeing him." She opened it later, in the car. Inside was a handwritten note and a check for $1,000, far more than the original offer. But she didn't keep it, not yet. She tucked it into her purse, unsure what to do with such generosity. On the ride home, neither of them spoke for a long time. The city lights streaked past the windows like falling stars. Finally, Oliver broke the silence. "You were amazing tonight." She looked at him. "I didn't do anything special. You were real," he said. That's the rarest thing. She thought about Eleanor's words, about how he'd looked when his grandmother hugged her, like he was watching something he'd always wanted but never believed he could have. "I think she knew," she said quietly. He sighed. "Probably. She knows everything. Are you mad?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'm grateful. You gave her a gift tonight, and me too." They pulled up to her apartment. He walked her to the door, hands in his pockets again the same way he had the night before. "I'll give you the money tomorrow," he said. "Or whenever you want." She shook her head. "Keep it. Or better yet, donate it to that hospital software project you mentioned. The one that helps kids." He looked surprised. "You remembered that?" "I remember a lot," she said with a small smile. He stepped closer, just a little. "Can I see you again? Not as a fake date, just as me." She studied his face, the tired lines around his eyes, the hope beneath the uncertainty. "Only if you promise not to rehearse," he laughed softly. "Deal." She turned to go inside, then paused. "Oliver? Yeah? Your grandmother's right. You do deserve joy." He didn't answer, but the way he looked at her, like she'd handed him something precious he hadn't known he was missing, said everything. Inside, she leaned against the door and let out a long breath. Her brother was asleep on the couch, textbook open on his chest. She covered him with a blanket, then went to her room and sat by the window. The city hummed below, alive and endless. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She'd walked into a stranger's world and left a mark, not because she pretended, but because she chose to be honest in a room full of expectations. And somewhere out there, a lonely man was driving home, maybe smiling to himself, maybe already thinking about what to say the next time they met. Not as a CEO, not as a client, just as a person who'd finally been seen. A week passed and the world kept turning, but not quite the same way it had before. She went back to the cafe like nothing had changed. Same apron, same morning rush, same regulars who ordered the same drinks with the same tired smiles. But something inside her had shifted. She caught herself watching the door a little longer each time it opened, not because she expected him, but because part of her hoped he'd walk in like any ordinary person, just needing coffee. Not a performance, he didn't come. At first, she told herself it was fine. He was busy. He'd said what he needed to say. The deal was done. But then the local gossip blog posted a blurry photo. Her and him leaving the restaurant that night, his hand lightly on her back, both of them laughing under the street lamp. The caption read, "Mystery woman spotted with tech CEO, new romance or PR stunt." The comments were a mix of speculation and snark. Some called her a gold digger. Others wondered if she was a plant from a rival company. One even joked she looked too normal to be real. She deleted the tab fast, but the sting stayed. Worse, people at the cafe started noticing. A customer asked if she was dating that rich guy. Another snapped a photo when she wasn't looking. Her manager pulled her aside, not angry but concerned. "Just be careful," he said. "We don't want drama here." She nodded, but inside she felt exposed, like someone had pulled back a curtain she didn't know was there. She hadn't asked for attention. She'd only said yes to a quiet favor, a moment of kindness. Now it felt like the whole city had an opinion on her choices. Meanwhile, Oliver's world was unraveling in quieter, sharper ways. He'd returned to his office the next morning expecting business as usual. Instead, he found an email from his board chair requesting an urgent meeting. In the conference room, 3 men in expensive suits sat with folded hands and tight smiles. "We're not questioning your leadership," one said carefully, "but appearances matter. That photo, it's raising eyebrows. People are wondering if your judgment is clouded." "It was a family dinner," Oliver replied, voice calm but jaw clenched. "With my grandmother." "And the woman?" "A friend. A friend who showed up out of nowhere wearing a dress worth more than most employees' monthly pay." He didn't correct them, didn't explain. Because the truth, that he'd paid someone to pretend, would have sounded worse. So he let them believe what they wanted. But the damage was done. Projects were delayed. Decisions were second-guessed. Even his assistant started tiptoeing around him like he might snap. He tried calling her twice. Both times he hung up before it rang. Not because he didn't want to talk, but because he didn't know what to say. "Sorry my life blew up yours? Thanks for being real while I was still pretending." Nothing felt right. Then on a rainy Thursday, much like the day they'd met, he showed up at the cafe. She saw him through the window before he even opened the door. He wasn't in a suit, just a gray sweater, jeans, and the same worn shoes from that first day. He looked tired, but not defeated. Just human. Her stomach flipped. She wiped her hands on her apron and took a breath. He ordered black coffee, same as always, and waited by the counter. When she handed it to him, their fingers didn't touch. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. She glanced at the clock. Her shift ended in 20 minutes. "Outside, after I clock out." He nodded and took his coffee to the far corner, not sitting, just standing near the window, watching the street like he used to. When she finally stepped out, the air was cool and damp. He turned right away like he'd been counting the seconds. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "For everything. She crossed her arms, not out of anger, but to hold herself together. Which part? The photo? The rumors? Or the fact that I'm now the mystery woman in your life story? All of it, he said. I didn't think it would blow up like this. I thought it was just one night. Just for her. It was, she said. But you live in a world where just one night becomes headlines. He looked down. I know, and I hate that it dragged you into it. She studied him. The shadows under his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped like he was carrying something heavy. Did you lose your job? No, he said quickly. But I might lose their trust. And that's almost worse, she sighed. I turned down the money, you know. Your grandmother gave me a check. I didn't cash it, his head snapped up. Why? Because it didn't feel right, she said. I didn't help you for money. I helped you because you looked lost, he swallowed hard. I was. They stood in silence for a moment, the rain starting again. Soft, steady drops that pattered on the sidewalk. I like the real you, she said finally, her voice softer now. Not the one who pays people to fill silence. He flinched just slightly. I'm trying to be that person. But it's hard when your whole life has been about control, about making sure everything looks perfect even when it's falling apart inside. I get that, she said. But you can't fix loneliness by hiring someone to pretend it's gone. I know, he whispered. She looked at him, not as a CEO, not as a man with money, but as someone who'd shown her his cracks and asked, in the quietest way, for help. Then stop pretending, she said. With your family. With your work. With yourself. And if you ever want to talk, really talk, without scripts or expectations, I'm here. But not as a date, not as a fix. Just as a person, he nodded slowly. That's all I want. She turned to leave, then paused. And Oliver? Yeah? Tell your grandmother thank you for me. For seeing me. For seeing you. I will. She walked away, not looking back. But she didn't feel angry anymore. Just clear. Over the next few days, things began to settle. The gossip blog moved on to a celebrity breakup. The customers at the cafe stopped whispering. She threw herself into her design work, submitting applications to 3 small studios, even sketching ideas for her own logo. Oliver didn't come back to the cafe. But a week later, a plain envelope arrived at her apartment. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. I told my board the truth that I hired someone to comfort my grandmother. And in doing so, I found something I didn't know I was missing. Honesty. They didn't love it, but they respected it. I've started seeing a therapist. Eleanor says I'm finally growing up. Thank you for showing me that real connection doesn't need a price tag. Oh, at the bottom, tucked into the fold, was a business card for a nonprofit that taught design skills to underprivileged teens. On the back, he'd written, "They're looking for a part-time instructor. Thought you might be interested." She smiled, not because of the opportunity, though she was, but because he'd listened. He hadn't tried to fix her life with money. He'd simply opened a door and stepped back. That night, she called her brother. "Hey," she said. "Remember that studio dream? Yeah? I think it's time I stopped waiting for permission to chase it." He laughed. About time. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual chaos. Sirens, laughter, the hum of life moving forward. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She was becoming. And somewhere across town, a man sat with his grandmother over soup, talking not about profits or press, but about fear, forgiveness, and the quiet courage it takes to be real. No scripts, no roles. Just 2 people learning how to be human again. Weeks passed, and life settled into a new kind of rhythm. Not perfect, but honest. She stopped checking her phone every time it buzzed, hoping for a message that never came. She stopped scanning the cafe door for a familiar silhouette. Instead, she poured her energy into things she could control, finishing her portfolio, applying for that teaching gig at the nonprofit, even signing up for a weekend workshop on branding. Her brother started his new semester, and she helped him pick out textbooks with the money she'd saved from extra shifts. The apartment felt lighter, not because anything huge had changed, but because she'd stopped waiting for someone else to make her feel seen. She'd done that herself. Oliver, meanwhile, had vanished from the headlines. No more blurry photos, no more rumors. His company released a quiet statement about internal restructuring and renewed focus on mission-driven work. Industry blogs barely noticed. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He'd started going to therapy like he'd promised, not because he was broken, but because he finally understood that even strong people need help carrying their weight. He visited his grandmother every Sunday now, not out of guilt, but because he missed her stories, her sharp wit, the way she could tell he was lying with just one look. They'd sit in her sunlit kitchen sipping tea and talk about everything except the dinner that started it all. But sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, she'd smile to herself, like she knew something he hadn't figured out yet. Then one Saturday morning, the bell above the cafe door chimed. She was wiping down the counter, humming along to the radio when she glanced up and froze. There he was, not in a suit, not with a rehearsed line or a folded bill in his hand. Just a man in a soft-looking sweater, slightly rumpled jeans, and the same quiet eyes that had first asked her for help on a rainy afternoon. He looked different, not richer or more polished, but softer, like he'd finally let his shoulders drop. He didn't walk straight to the counter. He lingered near the door, hands in his pockets, watching her like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Her heart thudded, but she kept wiping. When she finally looked up and met his gaze, she didn't smile right away. But she didn't look away either. "You're back," she said, voice calm. "Only if it's okay," he replied. She nodded toward the menu board. "What'll it be?" "Surprise me," she raised an eyebrow. "That's risky. I trust you." The words hung in the air, simple but heavy. She turned to the machine, steamed milk, pulled a shot, added just a touch of vanilla, something she remembered he'd once said he liked but never ordered because it felt too indulgent. She handed him the cup. He took a sip, paused, then smiled. Real, slow, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Perfect," she leaned against the counter. "No script this time?" "No script," he said. "Just me." She studied him. The dark circles under his eyes were lighter. His posture wasn't so rigid. Even his voice sounded freer, like he wasn't holding his breath anymore. "How's your grandmother?" she asked. "Good, she asked about you." "She did?" She said, "Tell that kind girl I hope she's designing the life she deserves." She felt a lump in her throat. "She's something else." "She is." He took another sip, then glanced around. "This place feels peaceful." "It is. When it's not rush hour," he chuckled. "Can I sit? Just for a few minutes?" "Sure. Booth in the back's free." He nodded and walked over, not rushing, not performing, just moving through the world like any other person. She watched him for a moment, how he set his cup down carefully, how he looked out the window like he was really seeing the street for the first time. When her shift ended, she untied her apron, grabbed her bag, and walked over to his table. "Mind if I join you?" He looked up, surprised but pleased. "I was hoping you would." She slid into the booth across from him. Outside, the city hummed, buses rolling by, kids laughing, the distant chime of a bike bell. Normal sounds, real life. "So," she said, "what now?" He didn't give a grand answer, didn't promise anything. Just said, "I'd like to get to know you. The real you, no roles, no expectations, just conversation." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Because you reminded me that connection doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be true." She thought about that, about how easy it would be to say no, to protect herself, to keep things simple. But then she remembered the look on Eleanor's face when she hugged her. The way Oliver had listened like her dreams mattered. The quiet courage it took for him to show up today, not as a CEO, but as a man trying to do better. "Okay," she said, "but coffee's on you." He laughed, a real warm sound that filled the space between them. "Deal." They talked for hours, not about work or money or the past, about books they loved, places they wanted to visit, the weird way rain smells on hot pavement. He told her about a hiking trail he'd discovered up north, where the trees were so tall they blocked out the sky. She told him about a mural she'd painted in her old neighborhood when she was 16. Bright colors, wild shapes, a message about hope that someone had tagged over a year later, but kids still pointed to it like it meant something. At one point, he asked, "Do you ever regret saying yes that day?" She thought for a long moment. "No, because it led me here. To this conversation. To remembering that I'm allowed to take up space." He looked down, then back at her. "I'm glad you said yes too. Not because of the dinner. Because of you." The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the table. Neither of them moved to leave. Later, as they stepped outside, the air was crisp. The kind of autumn evening that made you want to walk forever. "Can I walk you home?" he asked. She considered it, then nodded. "Yeah, but only if you promise not to overthink every word you say." "I'll try," he said with a grin. They walked side by side, not too close, not too far. No hands held, no grand declarations. Just two people moving through the city at the same pace, finally comfortable in their own skin, and in each other's presence. When they reached her building, she turned to him. "Thanks for the coffee. And the talk." "Thank you," he said. "For giving me a second chance to be real," she smiled. "We all deserve that."